Alright everyone, and welcome back to the Monarchs Tribunal. So today with me, my guest is none other than the heathen himself who will blaspheme the name of David Cage. We have Zendari of Xanatrix Enterprises. I think I screwed a name up in there somewhere.
Oh yeah, you definitely butchered everything, Monarch. Welcome everybody who doesn't know me. For those of you who haven't been over in the monastery or anywhere else I've ever been, my name is Xanatrix Zadari. I am the master of 1,000 runes, the CEO of Zadari Enterprises, and the bane of the monk's fucking existence. And Zadari Enterprises wants you for the David Cage War.
Yes. For anyone just now tuning in is unaware of this show, I pretty much just bring on a guest of a differing opinion on a topic, game, anime, anything along those lines. And today we're going to be talking about David Cage, where I fight uphill trying to justify his existence.
Monarch knows he's on the losing end here.
I stepped in today knowing exactly who I was talking about.
Knowing exactly who he was talking about and exactly who his opponent was.
Look, you could pit me up against a 6-year-old who has seen 5 minutes of one of this man's games, and I'd be on the losing side of the argument.
Well, I'm glad you know that it takes a mental invalid to try and defend David Cage. Please tell us whether you have brain damage after all of this.
Well, I was never hugged as a child.
I'm not sure that applies, but okay. That went dark real quick, almost like David Cage tries to.
For anyone tuning in who has no idea who David Cage is, firstly, I envy you. He makes things that are barely considered games.
They have interactive elements, and there are win and lose conditions. Yes, you can say that's a game.
He slips in by technicality.
He is technically correct. The best kind of correct.
Like, how do you even start talking about this man without immediately painting him with a bad brush?
I mean, you really can't. No, wait, hold on. You can. Before David Cage became a director and writer of video games, he was a composer for some video games. And he was a pretty good composer, too. Even though you've probably never heard of or played these games, unless you're like me and have bargain bin dived. They're not dumpsters. They actually have price tags. Bargain bin dived for certain video games, such as Cheese Catastrophe starring Speedy Gonzalez, Time Cop, and Hardline. The music is quite okay for those games, despite the games themselves being, well, you tell me what you think a Speedy Gonzalez game would be like. Especially it being called Cheese Catastrophe with a hyphen between the cat and the rest of the word, because Looney Tunes attempts at puns. But he did well as a composer. He was not very fulfilled being a composer. Which is why he decided in 1994, while still composing, to start writing up his first video game. It took him 5 years. It left him with a 200-plus page design doc.
To be fair, I'm not going to give him shit for taking 5 years to write up his first game. I'm not even going to really complain or give him shit about maybe the not most optimized of design documents. It was his first go.
And yet he thought it was a goddamn masterpiece. He tried to get a bunch of people in the industry he knew on his side to work on this.
He
This
did get
game,
David
by
Bowie.
the way, yes, which is a fucking miracle and probably the only good thing.
That said, I've not played it, so I can't even comment if the game turned out well or not.
I don't remember the Nomad Soul very well, and I'm glad I don't. For those of you, it may have been called. For some of you, it may have been called Omicron: The Nomad Soul. It was a game made in 1999 between then up-and-coming Quantic Dream, with in partnership with Eidos Interactive, basically. Of course, at that time, Quantic Dream may have well just been David Cage himself. In fact, if you ask David Cage, Quantic Dream still is just David Cage himself. But after he made this 200-page design document and spread it amongst his contacts, which I might add, remember that he is not yet a director and writer of video games. He's a composer. So most of the people he sends this shit to is in the music industry. And they all tell him it's technically impossible. And then Eidos Interactive decides to give him a shot.
So really we can blame Eidos for all of this with David Cage.
I mean, I don't think we can, because Eidos Interactive, well, they made some good games, you know. Anyone who doesn't know what Eidos has made, you probably have been living under a rock, and I'm going to start calling you Wukong. Because Eidos Interactive, before Square Enix absorbed it, made, you know, games like, I don't know, Deus Ex, like the original Deus Ex, alongside Ion Storm. Eidos was the publisher for most of these. Same with publishing games from Crystal Dynamics, such as the Blood Omen and Legacy of Kain series. So Eidos had a lot of good shit. Eidos also had some really shit like Daikatana or the second Deus Ex game. Eidos also helped with PC ports of some of the Final Fantasy games, once I believe before Square merged with Enix, and before Square even had a chance to touch bases with Eidos and try and absorb them. But there's a lot of things Eidos has done over the years.
And I'm sure someone is going to deny being involved in David Cage. I would. And I'm the one on his side in this stream, for the record.
Mm-hmm. I would also like to point out that technically Eidos as a group hasn't existed since 2009 because it was absorbed by Square Enix at that point and made into Square Enix Europe. And then later, Embracer Group pulled in Crystal Dynamics, Eidos Montreal, and Square Enix Montreal to get a hold of such IPs as Tomb Raider, Deus Ex, and Thief. But then I believe Embracer Group had some troubles, and I think they shut down the Eidos part. I can't remember, though. I am not going to... don't quote me on that. Let's put it that way.
But after, you know, the Nomad Soul, we kind of get to the game, I think, defined David Cage and what he was going to be doing going forward.
Fahrenheit?
It had a different game depending on the country, if I remember right.
It was called Indigo Prophecy in other countries.
Yes.
Known as Indigo Prophecy in North America. Fahrenheit everywhere else. Oh man, this game.
Not a lot of people played this one, but it kind of gave him that cult following because it's different.
Gave him that cult following that's the same cult following as the South Park episode where everyone is farting into wine glasses and sniffing them.
Yep. These are my people right now. I'm feeling I should have had a drink before this stream.
You probably should have. I probably should have too. But I get to tear the hell out of David Cage. So,
now, for the record, this one I still haven't actually played. I've seen a lot of bits of it. But
I am someone who has played probably every David Cage game, and it shows in my mentality.
I played every one after this.
Fahrenheit.
Oh, go on.
Yeah, I was gonna say Fahrenheit. I would say Fahrenheit is just campy enough that it doesn't quite make you think it's trying to take itself seriously sometimes, and then it mood whiplashes you to it's taking itself way too seriously for what the fuck it is. It doesn't know where it wants to be in some cases.
Yeah. Now, I think if you didn't know if that game was trying to take itself seriously, once you played the rest of the games, you kind of get he's made. It's like, okay, yeah, that was him being serious. No question.
Yeah, because the next game is fucking Heavy Rain. Jason!
God.
Jason!
All right. This is something I've said ages ago. I don't remember when, but this is how I'm going to describe David Cage in general going forward. David Cage really is able to set up a scene with an incredible atmosphere. The problem is all the characters involved are written by David Cage, who doesn't understand how people work.
It's almost like he's fighting my battle for me. I will admit, David Cage does have an eye for good cinematography. See, this is where what I'm talking about with my brain damage. Good cinematic framing. He does have a way with camera angles and shot framing. That's absolutely true. And then people talk. And you go, oh, I wish this were a silent film.
I'm not going to say all of the dialogue is, my God, what the fuck have you written?
No, only the most important parts. Only the most important parts. Any of the big revelations about Sean and the origami killer or anything else, anything serious. It's like he didn't direct the voice actors, or if he did, he said, please chew the scenery as much as possible.
Which gets really awkward because of just how it's supposed to be animated to look a lot more realistic than other games at the time.
And I think I'm pretty sure that David Cage has been using facial motion capture for ages at this point.
And I'll say it actually came out looking pretty good with Heavy Rain.
For a PS3 game, yeah, I would say that.
It was great. And I'll also say the story itself is actually a really interesting idea. The setup's all there. I like you're following around all these different characters and the choices do affect what ends up happening. It's just, all the little pieces that are meant to put it all together. That's where it falls apart. So essentially, he wrote an okay outline, made sure to hit the high notes of his outline because they're what's important, and then said, the rest of it will fucking fit itself together. Yeah. And
you get some of the stupidest bullshit. Or the times that, sometimes the 6-axis doesn't detect what you're trying to do and you fail a part of one of the sequences, and now you've got to reload your save because you didn't want to fail that part because you really wanted to see what the outcome would be if you fully succeeded. And yeah, using nascent technology, while fun, can still be a nightmare.
Yeah, I actually again, it's a great premise. Screwing up doesn't end things, but things go forward in a different way. The problem is, that 6-axis stuff was too touchy, let's say, that it just makes it more frustrating than interesting at times.
It's good that you bring up the whole failing a sequence doesn't end the game. This leads into one of David Cage's most pretentious ideals. This man says game over events in any story-driven, non-action video game is a failure of game design.
Yeah, no.
First of all, there are plenty of story-driven, non-action games where failure to succeed means you die. And that's perfectly acceptable. Death is an acceptable outcome to communism. Wait, wrong game. Game over is a thing that exists because you know it's a game. If you wanted there to be no end state for a bad outcome, you're not looking at that point to gamify. Although in some cases there shouldn't be an end state depending on the stakes available. Let's keep this in mind. It definitely matters what the stakes are at the time that you are doing a thing. But if the stakes are high enough that there should be an end state for that failure, then that end state should exist. That's just how stakes and gaming work.
See,
if you don't want to do it that way, then make a movie.
Yeah, see, I'm going to distinguish between two things here. The stupid shit David Cage says and the games he gives us. That'll be important for later when we talk about some other stuff he's also done. Like
the stupid shit David Cage says and the games he's made. Because I'm sure this won't come back to bite you in the ass.
This is I'm drawing a distinction between the two.
I know.
Because he regularly says some horrifically stupid shit, like what you just pointed out.
Yes.
See, I like that this kind of thing exists that he did with Heavy Rain, but the idea of doing it other ways with end states earlier on is a failure it's just fucking dumb. There's plenty of room for both to exist.
Absolutely. And it should depend on the stakes that are available at that particular time. I mean, remember, one of the stakes is cutting off your own finger. I would like to note that cutting off your own finger does not just suddenly stop the bleeding. In fact, wrapping up the stump of your finger does not suddenly just stop the bleeding. I would like to note that one of the most unrealistic things I've ever seen in any fiction, and yes, I admit some fictions don't need this level of realism because, well, it's fiction. But in this case, Heavy Rain is extremely it's a murder mystery. It's grounded in almost full-on reality. If a man cuts off his finger, he is going to need medical attention in minutes so that they can at least suture and tie up the artery in the finger so he doesn't continue to spurt fucking blood. Suspension of disbelief, though. I will give it suspension of disbelief. This is just me harping on it because at the same time, David Cage did want there to be a sense of gritty realism in this game.
Like, I look at this scene that way. Like, yes, you're right. In the moment, though, I think that scene really is done well enough. You're not sitting there thinking about that. It has you wrapped up in the moment, and quite frankly, that may be the best scene in any David Cage game right there.
You know, there's one thing he could have done that would have made me go, oh, okay, he'll be fine. Do you know what it would have been?
What?
Give Ethan a tube of super glue. Super glue the stump closed.
Yeah.
It works. There's a reason that there is now what's essentially, I should say, biologically safe dissolving liquid sutures is, I guess, the best way to call them. But it's basically just purple super glue that's okay to dissolve into your body.
But yeah,
and it works.
That's also kind of where I'll say, some people say, oh, we should have just made this a movie. The interactive elements involved in that, and you actually having to go through some motions with that controller to cut that finger off, I think actually does add to it. The interaction he put in these games, it wasn't just a complete waste. I mean, yes, sometimes you also do all this weird shit to pick up and open a magazine for some reason.
Yeah, instead of just press button to open magazine.
But
because I want you to feel like you're actually doing it. Yeah, no. I will, as I said, I will give credit where credit is due. Many of Cage's interactive elements in the most intense moments of his games make sense, and they do heighten the scene. But the biggest issue, again, just like with the writing, is that Cage puts all the best shit on the climaxes and then doesn't give a shit what happens in between. I swear to God.
Yeah.
So
that's exactly right.
The interaction to paint in Detroit Become Human, and we'll get there. Why couldn't I just press a button?
Yeah. But all of these aspects that we've already covered up, they do carry on through kind of every game he did after, which is not a lot of games.
Most of it's demos that were basically tech demos made for the next game he was going to make.
Even though I don't think that one with the wizard dude turned into anything.
Yeah, the Dark Sorcerer was kind of weird. I think it was supposed to eventually lead into Beyond Two Souls, and then never did. Because Beyond Two Souls went in an entirely different direction.
Yeah.
And by entire... Beyond Two Souls, do you know the most... let's be honest here. He cast Willem Dafoe, knowing exactly that Willem Dafoe is going to chew the scenery. Willem Dafoe can do nothing but chew the scenery. I'm not kidding.
No, though. In the case of Beyond Two Souls, this is why I'm drawing that distinction between the stuff he does in games and shit he says. Because I remember the initial trailer for this game, where seconds before the trailer started, he said, look, all these games are trying to sell you with violence, explosions, car chases. I'm not gonna do that. And immediately you see a trailer full of violence, explosions, and car chases.
Let's also not forget that he said that his games aren't just games. They provide interactive storytelling that can be experienced by everyone, even people who aren't gamers. Motherfucker, people who aren't gamers don't want to play your games. They're not going to purchase your fucking games.
God, what was the other really stupid thing he said about this one? In fact, he said, look, as you play through the game, like, there will be little changes based off your thing. So, like, everyone gets an individual story that's just from what they did. You shouldn't replay this game. I'm like, what? You don't want people to replay your game because it'll be a different story for them? The fuck are you on? It's like, he's basically telling everyone to just rent the game, and if everyone does that, it's just gonna flop. The man's an idiot.
I'd like to point out he said some stupid shit about Beyond Two Souls. Like it was a more action and driven experience with much more direct control and more spectacular action than Heavy Rain. While all technically true, that doesn't necessarily make it better. Cage also said that all of his games are 100% fully controllable until he's like, but what about the action sequences? And like, okay, some action sequences, we sometimes integrate QTEs, but it's in a new way. It's like, motherfucker, no, it isn't. It's a QTE. You can only implement QTEs in one way, and that's to be a button press that does something in a cinematic fashion. I mean, even though it was really cool in God of War 3, when you were finishing off Poseidon, you got the L3 R3 prompt when you were looking through Poseidon's eyes at Kratos, and you press that L3 R3 knowing exactly what's about to happen, which is Kratos gouging out his eyes with his thumbs. It's still a fucking QTE. It's a cool one. It's a QTE.
It's the thing, like, I don't even think the QTEs in Beyond Two Souls were done bad at all. At least, again, not the major set pieces.
I was about to say, once again,
like,
we have the issue.
It works.
We have the issue of some of these QTEs are really good, and it's always at the climax points. Outside of the climax points, you're going to get hit or miss. Some of the QTEs make sense. Some are just fucking dumb.
Yeah. I just realized we went through talking about Heavy Rain, and we didn't even bring up the QTE sex scene.
I mean, QTE sex scenes are
dumb.
QTE sex scenes are nothing new. Remember that technically God of War 1 had a QTE sex scene. It was more a mini game that allowed you to get experience.
This one was just fucking awkward.
Not as awkward as anything Neil Druckmann has ever made.
Oh God.
I am taking a dig at the Abby sex scene in fucking The Last of Us 2.
What, where he did the motion cap for both people because the actress wouldn't do it? So you're watching David Cage, or not David Cage, you're watching
Neil
Druckmann
Druckmann
fuck himself?
You know, that's quite poetic, don't you think?
Yes.
But Druckmann is not the target here. He just became collateral damage.
Oh God, Druckmann. I will take Cage over Druckmann. However low that bar was set.
I don't know how low that bar is, but we're walking over that bar simply by existing, so I would rather just watch paint dry than associate with either of these guys. But that's a different story.
But yeah.
Like
again though, in relation to Beyond Two Souls.
Yeah. Beyond Two Souls has he tried to do an more actiony game, which again by technicality he did. But I'd also like to point out that he then also tried to do the whole woo emotional and mysticism stuff he's done with every fucking game.
Look,
it's like, motherfucker.
So I'll give him this. Like, there was also another really good idea that I thought was well implemented here, and that's it's not telling the story chronologically. It's telling the story, like, from beginning to end by weight of emotional impact of what you're supposed to be seeing. It was an interesting way to go about it. Again, the writing was done by David Cage, so it suffers a lot for that. But that actual idea was implemented really well, I thought.
Yes, it was an interesting way to tell the story. Now, if only the story were more compelling.
I think he just needs to get someone else to write the dialogue for him.
I think he needs to get an editor. No, let me be perfectly honest here. He hits the high notes really well. And like I said, his direction for, cinematic scenery, for making this shot composition really good and all of that really well. Get an editor. Get someone to edit your scripts, edit your director's notes, so that you can seamlessly integrate everything in a way that makes more sense and a more compelling story. Because I actually think he could make some much more compelling games that way. Now, again, we're using the word game here very loosely, because once again, his games are mostly walk around, press button to observe and or collect information of something, and QTE. It's almost Shenmue levels of bad. Uh-oh, hold on. I hear it in the distance. Can you hear the drums drumming? The Shenmue fanboys are going to get on me. Hey, fuck you. Shenmue was never good, motherfuckers. You just have nostalgia up the ass, and it was also probably the only game you owned on your Dreamcast.
They had Skies of Arcadia. That was good.
They should have gotten the Power Stone games. Power Stone was great. In fact, I'd say Power Stone was a better Smash Bros. Than Smash Bros. At the time. Sure, it wasn't exactly the same as Smash Bros., but I'd still say it's a better Smash Bros. Than Smash Bros. At the time. But this is something we tend to see with a lot of Cage's works, and we'll see it when we move forward to Detroit Become Human as well. He has a lot of scenes that have a punch to them. There's scenes that have that immediate sting of heightened response. And everything else around them feels bland by comparison because he doesn't know how to he doesn't know how to vary them properly. And it's actually really obvious in Detroit Become Human.
Yes, despite the problems in the last couple games we were talking about, I do like Heavy Rain and Beyond Two Souls. I enjoyed playing through them. Detroit, on the other hand.
Played Detroit Beyond Human. It is
totally not an allegory for civil rights.
It is one of the games. Yes. We'll get there. It is one of the games ever. This is true. There are some very enjoyable scenes in Detroit Beyond Human. Or was it Become Human? I don't remember.
I don't fucking care.
I don't. I'm pretty sure it's Become Human. I'm just mixing up titles at this point.
So, this is something like he's never really gotten political before this game.
And this game is extremely political in very different ways. I'd also like to point out, though, what I was about to say, there are some very enjoyable scenes, some very cool things you can see in Detroit Become Human. Go onto YouTube, look up Detroit Become Human Best Scenes compilation. All paths if you need to add that to the end.
It will be a better experience in playing the game.
Watch 1 to 2 hours of YouTube videos, and there you go. You have a 50-hour game condensed into its best moments in about 2 hours.
I will give him a couple things for this game. The Connor story was actually probably the best written beginning to end, because at least for the most part, the dialogue felt a lot more natural. The interactions between him and
Hank,
I had to think for a second there, are actually really good. But
you know what's really fun about Connor? And the whole Connor story and the interactions between Connor and Hank. They're the parts David Cage hates most. And here's the reason. Course. No, here's the reason. Actor Brian Deshar, the guy that is both the model for Connor and the voice, and actor Clancy Brown, the model and voice of Hank. Anybody should recognize Clancy Brown. He's the I think one of my best Clancy Brown lines is, "The enemy cannot push a button if you disable his hand." Thank you, Starship Troopers. Everybody should recognize who Clancy Brown is. But the Brian Deshar has said on his own Twitch streams a while back that David Cage hated him and Clancy Brown's scenes because Brian Deshar is originally an improv actor and comedian in certain ways. And most of the lines kept for Hank and Connor's interactions are improv stuff they threw in and not part of the script. You want to know why the story feels better, written better, and sounds like real dialogue? Because it fucking is!
I mean, that makes so much sense. It's like, what was it? The best part of Borderlands 2 was Handsome Jack, and all of that was just the fucking voice actor. Just riffing lines.
Well, here's the big thing. Brian Deshar has said publicly on Twitch again that his favorite Connor line in the whole game is, "I like dogs." And that David Cage cannot stand that line because it became kind of an in-joke for him and Clancy Brown. It truly warms the deadest, coldest regions of my black and tar-covered heart that the actor can get a one-up on one of the most pretentious cocksucker directors in video games. And if he ever sees this, I don't know if he will, I kind of doubt it, but if he does, Brian, we stan you in this house. Rock on, bro. Rock on.
But yes, like, I will say in relation to David Cage putting his own politics in the game, after a few years, I will grant him this. He is not the least subtle about his politics in any game I've ever played. In fact, there are times in this story, at the very least, he doesn't 100% paint the people he disagree with as just haters for hating's sake.
No, he instead paints the people he agrees with as, if you really need to, take the most extreme option and murder everyone. The Android Uprising particular ending you can get is fucking stupid.
I will say, though, I do kind of like if you go a violent route with the androids, it does affect what happens in bits with Clara's route. Because if it's all over the news, they're violent and angry, the guard decides, I'll go ahead and let you into California. Or not California, Canada, whatever. Like, if they're angry, you can't get through. It's like, I'm not going to let you through this border. All these androids are violent. Or if it's a peaceful protest, he'll just kind of turn the other cheek.
Do you know what my favorite thing about getting through any of the routes on this game is?
What?
If you go with a route where Connor stops the uprising entirely, especially if it's through violent means, where he kills the leaders of this android uprising and does exactly what they all want, then they're all like, "Good job. Now here's the 900 series. You're being discontinued." That whole thing. If you do that, when you get back to the title screen, the little guidance android Kara or whatever her name is, you see her little ring update, and she's like, "You just stood there and watched while they were slaughtered. How could you?" I'm like, "Bitch, don't you proselytize to me. You're a fucking video game. You do not make me feel bad for my choices. You make me want to do it again. Just so I can watch you cry some more."
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. Like, when I first started playing this game, my entire thing with Clara was like, you know what? I'm gonna do everything I can to make her like the good little obedient android.
And then comes the part where they force you to break out.
I like that at least with Connor, you get the choice. No matter, like, if you did enough to be able to break out, you have the choice not to. I wish you got that option with Clara.
I love the fact that you can fail to pick up every clue in the game towards what's happening with Connor, and that just causes it so that they can't actually stop the uprising, whether it's peaceful or not.
Yeah. Look, I'm not going to sit here and say it's not frustrating liking David Cage's stuff. It is, because I feel like he doesn't like me back. That's what these games are like. It's like, I want to love so much he's done. And again, there's a lot of stuff he's done over the years. It sticks in the mind for good reasons.
Yeah, because he's a goddamn meme.
But fucking... No, I mean, like, the good stuff he's done. Like, it stays in your head for all the right reasons. Like, again, the sawing of the finger thing. Even Detroit's got some wonderful bits here and there. But holy shit. I want to like it, but it hates me. I'm like the abused housewife that just stays with the husband. Because I'm getting whatever game he releases next, I'm sure.
I've never bought a David Cage game. I've played them all, but I've never bought one. I have had Detroit Become Human bought for me, and I will find out which of my friends did that, and there will be a reckoning.
No, I paid for all of them.
I just... At this point, we've explored his repertoire of games.
And how totally none of them are civil rights allegory.
Yes.
Not a one.
He has specifically said that Detroit Become Human, which, let's just review what Detroit Become Human is about. There is a second-class citizenry of owned servants, the androids, who eventually start to break out of their programming, or chains, if you will, to become free people and the same class as everyone else. People may remember a few different acts throughout just the U.S. history alone that mirror this. But when someone questioned David Cage, asking him why he decided to do a civil rights movement allegory, you know, and basically compared Marcus, the leader of the Deviant Uprising, to either Martin Luther King Jr. if you go the peaceful route, or Malcolm X if you go the not so peaceful route, David Cage is on record stating, this isn't an allegory for the civil rights movement.
We're also going to ignore there were multiple characters named after civil rights figures.
Yeah, we're going to ignore that part. That part is not important. We know that's not important, right?
It's totally
it's
not an allegory.
Totally not an allegory for the civil rights movement. Totally not an allegory for the civil rights movement. Couldn't possibly be.
I can't help but think David Cage would have better publicity for his stuff if he would just shut the fuck up.
Once again, he needs an editor.
No, I mean he himself, personally. Just no interviews,
no.
just shut the fuck up.
No. You see, there's this thing. Okay, so he needs an editor for his writing on his games. He needs an editor for real life. Do you know what an editor for real life is called?
A handler.
A PR manager. He, much like Senator Armstrong, needs to have someone else write his speeches. Of course,
well, someone's
Senator
going to ask
Armstrong...
him a question. I don't think he's going to read the pre-done responses. I don't think handing him a script is going to matter.
Probably not.
He's going to steal David Cage.
Well, no. This is where we get into, especially with the stuff Brian Deshar has said about working with David Cage. This is where we get into what really drives David Cage and why he's so bad at this. The man imagines himself an artiste, an auteur. He thinks himself and his visions above and beyond reproach, which is why he got so pissed off when Brian deviated from script, because he believed that his vision was better, and he was pissed off that the best fan response for the game was from interactions between Connor and Hank. The man doesn't like to see his visions changed. He doesn't like to see his ideas muddied, which is why he'll never get an editor either, even though an editor would make everything 100 million times better. So it really boils down to pride and ego for David Cage, which, you know, let's be honest, makes sense. The man is French. Oh, I can hear those drums in the background now. Hello, French people. It's too bad you'll surrender to me in about 3 seconds. You're scared of the Scots, among other people.
I mean, I'm a little scared of the Scots. They're crazy.
You bet your ass we are. I'd also like to point out that the co-CEO of Quantic Dream has a very pretentious sounding name, but I very much doubt that this co-CEO is actually as pretentious as Cage, since Cage is all you ever hear about. But, you know, Guillaume de Fondamiere is a very head up ass sounding name.
Look, at this point, anyone who continues to work with David Cage, who has worked with him before, probably already have their head firmly up their asses.
Or they just like the smell of money.
That too.
Let's be fair, a CEO's primary directive is to make more money for the shareholders. So, now, some things to bring up. Warren Spector, for those who don't know who Warren Spector is, Warren Spector is probably one of the more prolific game designers, mostly as a producer, director, and writer. For example, he was a producer and writer on Ultima 4. He was a producer for many of the Wing Commander games, many of the other Ultima games, System Shock. He was the director and studio director and producer for Deus Ex and Deus Ex Invisible War. So he has done quite a few things that are, well, very well done. And Warren Spector said that David Cage is one of the best storytellers in the industry. Called him a genius. During this entire rant, both Monarch and myself have had to admit that there is some merit to Cage's writing. That he does indeed have cool story ideas and manages to hit the high points super accurately. The problem is he doesn't connect them well enough. A story needs to be a cohesive whole. Even if it's a short story, it still needs to be a cohesive whole. You cannot make a story out of nothing but climaxes. Well, unless it's a sex story, but then most porn doesn't really have a plot, does it?
Just watch more hentai. There's plenty of plots over there. Yeah, like, I think overall with David Cage, though... Oh, God.
I was going to say, if you're going to call more exposed flesh as plot, yes, you're correct.
But no, like, I think at the end of the day with David Cage, it comes down to this. Like, again, me and Zan seem to agree on just about everything David Cage related. Are those high memorable points and all the things he does do well, which again, he does have his positives, going to get you over the hurdle of the fact it's all done by David Cage?
once again, my view on this is that he needs an editor. He needs someone to take his good but disparate ideas and combine them in a cohesive whole. If his next game has an actual editor that helps him go, hey, here's where these connecting things would make more sense if you did this, that, and the other, and David Cage actually listens, or God forbid his co-CEO goes, listen to the editor we hired because we can make more money if you do. I would love to see his co-CEO just slap him down and be like, you can't be like this anymore. This is an intervention. Here's your editor. Do what they say.
Look, I'm gonna be honest. I think his head is so far up his ass, he hasn't heard a thing anyone else has said in years.
I wouldn't be surprised. David Cage seems fully full of himself. This is true. But with someone to properly tie together the cohesive units into a whole, instead of keeping them disparate and connecting them with fucking outlandish bullshit, you could have a solid story. And with a solid story, you can make a solid game. Now, will that ever happen? No. I have no clue.
Oh, with David Cage, it's not going to happen. It's never going to happen. I have no faith it's going to happen.
The only way it will happen is if there is an external force forcing him to. That's it. That's the only way I'm going to put that.
Someone would have to actively take control out of his hands for that to happen.
Well, that's why I said if his co-CEO, Guillaume, hired an editor and said, okay, so David, you're going to listen to your editor, or I'm going to take you off the board. He's like, you can't do that. I'm like, I'm co-CEO. You may be co-founder. I'm co-CEO. I absolutely can invoke our articles of corporation to disband, to take you off the board of directors so that you can't make these decisions anymore if we want to make lots more money and have a better reputation. Now, the real part that continues enabling David Cage isn't his company. It isn't himself. It is the fact that there are assholes out there still buying his games unironically. You don't count Monarch because you buy his games mostly ironically.
No.
Well, then you're part of the problem, fucker.
I know. That's what I said. Like, I accept all the problems, but I still legitimately like Heavy Rain and Detroit. Or not Detroit. Beyond Human, I like. Detroit, I ended up like, no, that one was too much.
Beyond two souls and Detroit Become Human, yes.
But no, Heavy Rain and Beyond Two Souls, I legitimately walked away enjoying playing. Despite the nonsense, despite the stupidity. I think in part it's because there's not really many people out there doing what David Cage does. I'm sure someone could do it.
I will point out someone who does what David Cage does and does it better. And has made better games. His name is Hideo Kojima. Please go play Metal...
I wouldn't put him in the same category as David Cage, to be honest.
No, I'm not talking about category of person. I'm talking about category of creator. Kojima has always put very heavy themes in his games. And he's...
Go on.
I was going to say, he's executed his stories well, and he's made sure that they're a cohesive whole, except when Konami gets in his way, slashes his budget and time, and makes sure he can only finish 2/3 of the game. Give me Metal Gear Solid V, the full game, please. And yes, it's Metal Gear Solid V, not Metal Gear Solid 5, as per Kojima himself. Fuck you all.
But no, like, David Cage almost I'd say he basically makes cinematic visual novels. Whereas Kojima makes action games with a heavy story. There was like one serial killer slasher game, I forget what it was called, that I kind of put in the same category.
Do you mean the game where you're dead and have to find your own murderer?
No, it was you're playing a bunch of characters in a slasher film, basically, where you're controlling the different ones at different times.
Do you have any idea how little that narrows it down? There's actually quite a few video games like that.
I know, but it plays like a David Cage game, and I can't remember the name.
Is it the one where it's a bunch of kids in a cabin out in snowy woods?
What's that? I only saw bits of it, but the point is there's not much out there that I think is an actual comparison to David Cage.
Because if I'm thinking about it, let me just. An interactive drama where players primarily assume control of 8 young adults who have to survive on Blackwood Mountain until they are rescued at dawn.
I believe that's
right?
the case.
And deaths are permanent?
I believe so, yes.
This one's the one that I'm thinking of specifically is called Until Dawn.
I think that's right.
But there are other games by the same studio, Supermassive Games, such as The Quarry, which came out only a couple years ago, who are 9 teenage counselors that have to survive the last night at Hackett's Quarry summer camp. There's also the Dark Pictures Anthology, which is an anthology of games.
It said, I will say, I did not like Until Dawn. But that's because I don't really care for the slasher movie, which that basically was in game form.
I mean, most of these are.
Yeah, it's...
Well, Supermassive makes a lot of different horror games. I mean, they technically made Little Big Planet as well, but that's a different issue. But they made... They also made Little Nightmares 2 Enhanced Edition, and are making Little Nightmares 3.
But at the end of the day, I still think that puts Cage in a very small camp of people making that kind of game. The things that don't quite feel like games, but still technically are.
You're talking about an interactive drama, essentially.
Yeah. So there's not a lot of competition for him to really go up against. Like, if this is the kind of thing that's going to grab your interest, you got Cage. And I think that gives him a lot more slack to not improve, because there's not as much need to.
I'm going to send you a link to a game that I want to play that is an interactive mystery story throughout time. By Square Enix.
The Medium?
It's also an FM. No, The Medium's not by Square Enix.
Who was The Medium? I swear that was Square, or that they were involved in that.
They might have been involved, but I'm pretty sure The Medium was Remedy. Oh no, Bloober Team.
Yeah.
Bloober Team. Who also did Layers of Fear and Observer and Blair Witch. Yeah. But there's a game called The Centennial Case, a Shijima story. Not only is this an interactive cinematic game, it's an FMV game. How long has it been since we've had a fucking FMV game?
Oh, it's been a while.
And on top of that, it also has one of the best common writer actors as one of the involved actors ever. Very happy he was in the game. But this is an interactive drama. It's exactly the same thing, except there's no, as far as I'm aware thus far, I haven't actually gotten to play the game. There's none of the over dramatic. I'm opening a magazine with QTE. It's a mystery game, essentially, a murder mystery over 100 years. That's why it's called The Centennial Case. But there are people who are trying to create similar interactive dramas, and at the same time, I don't think they're trying to create the exact same thing that Cage is trying to create.
Like, as time has gone on, we've seen more and more of it.
Mm-hmm. I think that Cage needs to acknowledge that he's shit at his job when he needs to create a larger story and get an editor.
I don't think he's going to have to acknowledge he's shit at his job until his game stops selling. Because I think they've all been profitable. At least since Heavy Rain.
Sad. Sadly, I think you might be right. Let me look at the sales numbers on each of these if I can find them. I mean, Detroit Become Human, we know, is gigantic.
And I'm pretty sure if something like Heavy Rain failed, I don't think they'd have given another weird ass thing like that a chance.
Yeah, well, looking at Fahrenheit, also known as Indigo Prophecy, it generally had 83 to 85% approval amongst critics. And this is back in a time in the early 2000s when critics were still trusted. Heavy Rain actually had less. Like, Metacritic had it at 87 for its PS3 version, but the PS4 and PS5 versions were rated much lower, I think, due to poor porting.
Yeah.
But then for things like Eurogamer and Game Informer, they're 9 and up. IGN has it a 9 out of 10 as well. Beyond Two Souls was actually rated rather low, usually around 70% on Metacritic, 50% on Destructoid and Joystick. It had very mixed reviews.
Yeah.
And then Detroit Become Human was around 80-ish% on Metacritic, and usually hovers between 70 and 80 on other sites, except for videogamer.com, where it had a 4.
Probably where it should have been. Maybe a little bit lower. But yeah. But as far as I'm aware, despite that, I think the sales were still good for Detroit.
The sales were great for Detroit. Which makes me want to gouge out someone's eyes for that. Not my own, though. I need my eyes to play video games. Yes, I know that there's a game to emulate being blind, and you get through the game using echolocation. Fuck you, people. I don't care. I need my eyes to play video games. Suck a dick. Now, there is one last thing we need to mention about David Cage, besides the fact that he's a pretentious asshole and thinks his shit doesn't stink. And that is the fact that there was a case against Quantic Dream, and more specifically against David Cage. At least there were some big allegations against David Cage regarding the fact that the place is a toxic workplace due to, in one case, an employee photoshopping pictures of other employees, and in other cases, abusive or toxic remarks from high up people. And what was alleged was that David Cage said all the female characters in his games were whores, and that Quantic Dream didn't make games for fags. Now, David Cage, in all his David Cage-ness, and I think at this point he did have a PR manager feeding him this line: I have never said or even thought such things. I fully understand people were shocked by seeing those words, and I'm deeply sorry for the pain and confusion they have caused women and the LGBTQIA+ community. The quotes are aberrant, and they do not reflect my views, nor the views of anyone at Quantic Dream. And then there were apparently LGBTQ employees at the studio that defended Cage, stating that the hurtful and misleading perceptions do not reflect these employees' everyday lives at their work. I don't think he actually said this. These things he's alleged to have said. For one, I don't think David Cage would care enough to say that. let's be real here. He would not care if someone called the women in his games whores. He would just tell them, "Well, you just don't get my artistic vision," and that would be it. However, the fact that it was alleged he said these things is enough to make me laugh my ass off.
Oh, yes. Like, I have no idea what's going on behind the doors of Quantic Dreams. But that's just hilarious. Because that's kind of the group you would expect he would want to appeal to.
Especially with Detroit Become Human.
Yes.
Because love between an android and a human would be a lot like an unacceptable love between, other people who have been traditionally persecuted for uncontrollable and immutable qualities.
Yeah.
So
yeah, unless you have something else to say in relation to Cage, I think that about wraps everything up.
I think in this case, everything I can say about Cage has been said about Cage. And so in summary, I find David Cage to be a man talented in making good bullet points for his stories and great shot composition for his cinematography. I find that his flaws far outweigh these things because his pretentious pride and ego prevent him from using proper tools to make more cohesive stories and more cohesive cinematography, which prevents his games from being anything more than memes in my world. So
I just kind of fall on slightly the other side of the fence. Like, yes, everything you said's right. And I'm not lumping Detroit in with the other game when I make this statement. I think there's enough things I liked about all of his other games. Like, I'm glad I've played them. And I think a lot of people are, considering people still keep buying this shit.
Since this is a tribunal, this technically means it's a court. And since it's a court, my verdict is David Cage, asshole.
Well, since I'm technically the monarch and this is my tribunal, David Cage, asshole, but just ignore him and enjoy some of his stuff. Don't listen to anything that's ever come out of the man's mouth.
Yes, this man talks bullshit as if it were the way, the truth, and the light.
God. Yeah. Nothing I say is at all a defense of the dumb shit he says. The man should not be allowed to promote his own games, ever. All right, so with that, I think we call the stream here. You can check either me and Zan out on Valley of the Judge with Mildra, or often on Geek Watch.
Nope.
And yeah, I'll see you with whoever my next guest is on whatever topic we decide.